Hi, and welcome to another video from the CTAD Clinic. My name is Dr. Mike Lloyd and I'm the Clinic Director. We're going to be looking at a part 2, considering the nature of pain and how it plays out within the field of complex trauma and dissociation. Some apologies if there is some sound in the background. We've got some building work going on elsewhere in the clinic, so apologies if there's going to be a disturbance. Also, there might be some elements of the conversation that I'm going to be having today that could be a little bit upsetting for people, so there is a sort of a mild trigger warning on some of the content later on in the session. Just thinking about the nature of body trauma. So hopefully it's not going to be too bad, but just in case people are a little bit wary, that you've got a bit of a heads up on that. So thinking about the nature of pain within complex trauma dissociation, the focus on this video is going to be more about the way that internal parts, so within dissociative identity disorder and other specified dissociative disorders, the way that parts or alters or others carry trauma and therefore carry some pain is going to be discussed in the video today. So this is very much more specific to DID, OSDD. It's in the nature of complex trauma, but the way it gets played out is largely very specific to this because it's about looking at the way that pain and alters are combined within each other. This makes sense, and it's quite an obvious thing in some respects because when trauma is being experienced, certainly in early childhood, the evolution of dissociation, of internal dissociated parts comes from that trauma. So the type of trauma often works itself into the type of alters that are being generated by the brain. So this is something that is linked right from the very start, from the design and the way that alters and the way that the dissociative system is being set out. So in a lot of ways, other alters are sort of protective functioning, so they might have fight-flight functions and they may have different action systems as we've discussed in previous videos. But what we're looking at here is where pain is being held within specific trauma and therefore within specific alters. So that's really going to be the focus of this video. The best example is thinking about something like a broken arm. So let's say a child undergoing complex trauma has an arm broken and that leads to a dissociation. So we're not talking about a sort of a playground incident, or falling out of a tree, breaking your arm. We're talking about much more of a deliberate action within the context of abuse, for example. So an arm is broken, that leads to intense pain. It could be from a very, very young child, and therefore dissociation takes place. An alter is formed to sort of manage and cope with that fear, that distress and that pain, and therefore the pain gets embodied within that alter. Now project forward many years later into adult life, and what a person might experience is random introductions of this pain within the arm that was broken. They may or may not remember the arm being broken, doesn't always really matter. But actually that arm randomly, it seems at times, suddenly becomes extremely painful or can't be used, because a broken arm is not just about pain, it's about the ability not to have use of that arm. So it becomes paralyzed in a way or non-functional, the grip, the tightness, the tendons, all of those things, that ability can be taken away. So a person might find that their arm can't be used, can be experiencing intense pain, and may wonder what on earth that is going on. It may because the arm is fully healed and there should be no reason whatsoever why there is any pain in that arm, and yet there it is. So one of the ways that we would look at that clinically is by thinking that that indicates the presence of that alter. So for whatever reason, it could be a trigger from something in the environment or in the world around this person that their arm is suddenly painful or not being able to be used in the right way, as if it has been broken all over again. That indicates the alter is present and there is some reason for that. So the alter, especially in OSDD, this is much more of a thing that we would see within that type of condition because it's in the background. With DID, it could be that the alter just sort of projects forward, comes forward, or fronts, as the case may be, and therefore the arm is in pain and the alter can talk about having pain. It can be a little bit easier to deal with. This is one of those times when OSDD is actually much more of a complex phenomenon to try and work around than DID. So the arm is hurt or not being used. It indicates that alter is present. There might not be a reason for that. The alter might not be verbal. It might not be vocal in any way, shape or form. And therefore there's a need to try and understand why that alter is present, why that influence of that pain is coming forward, and what is the resolution that is needed to try and achieve soothing or calming or peace, or to remove the pain and therefore heal the experience of the trauma that occurred early in childhood. So what we see here is that the pain is almost like the coating around the alter. So as the alter arrives, the pain that came with them in the early trauma experience comes forward. So the pain is an indication that an alter is present, especially when there's not verbal or it's not really a conscious understanding of that alter being present. And therefore we look at the pain and we look to see whether there's an alter that is side by side with that pain taking place. So this can be quite complicated because lots of people experience huge amounts of pain when they have complex trauma, and trying to identify or isolate specific things can be quite tricky. Now, I remember in my clinical experience working with a number of people who have very, very specific types of pain, and that is clearly related to a traumatic thing that took place. And what we see sometimes within that is that it is carried within the alter. The person kind of loses themselves. The pain engulfs, it takes over. The person sort of disappears into a dissociative state. And what can happen is coming forward is an incredibly terrified and scared alter that's experiencing a great deal of pain. And it's not always pain. And I suppose here's the trigger warning a little bit, is that sometimes what people experience are real manifestations of the way that they were traumatized in the first place. So some people experience feeling strangled or feeling suffocated, of being burned or being cut or being held tightly or being gripped or being tied up. So there's a number of different manifestations of this painful experience that occur in the present day that are clearly linked to specific types of trauma. So in the first video, we looked more about pain being this communicative tool of the body to say, don't ignore me. Pay attention, right? You're avoiding, you're distracting, you're pushing away, you're suppressing, you're rejecting, you're denying. I don't want you to. Here, it's much more of a defined means by which we can understand the trauma that a person has gone through. So the body retains the painful experience of the trauma, locates it within the alter brings it back, usually as a trigger of some form, and we get both at the same time. Often the person is dissociated out, leaves the alter there in intense distress. The job is to try and achieve soothing and healing of this part and therefore of the trauma. And again, when we're saying that, there's no reason for it in the present, it's that the pain is real, right? We always come back to this specific point that even though there's no physical cause for that pain, let's say back to the broken arm, the arm is clearly not broken, it was usable 5 minutes ago and now it's not, it hasn't just suddenly re-broken itself. So there is no reason for that pain being there in a physical medium, but in a psychological, traumatic medium, the pain is experienced as being incredibly real. This is the point that I really want to get across strongly, because I don't want people to think that their pain isn't real. The pain is real, but the cause for it is not. Same as I said in the first video. So when an alter brings forth pain, it can be intense pain. It can have a fundamental effect on the body. The body might stop working in some places, and all sorts of different things can happen when the body is recalling this pain in this specific way. It can be extremely distressing, very, very unpleasant and terrifying for the person to experience. In terms of what to do about it, there's a number of different therapeutic techniques, but it is really about sort of trying to connect and form some sort of communicative relationship with the alter to try and help them understand that what they went through in early life is no longer happening in the present. So that past, present type way we look at the therapy becomes very, very relevant. There's also specific techniques. So with body work, sensory motor psychotherapies have been shown to be extremely useful with this kind of thing. And this is in sensory motor work is really good because it forms that deep connection with the body and it tries to find out what hasn't yet been done. So I remember being a training session for sensory motor psychotherapy, and the trainer was talking about this unresolved story that has never taken place. So the trauma kind of creates the first part of the story, but it never gets healed. It gets stuck within the body, and the psychotherapy is about trying to release the trauma and trying to make it healed through a soothing and calming and grounding type approach. Sensory motor psychotherapies do really, really well. So there are therapeutic techniques for this, but it always comes back to that same thing that we look about, that there's a connection to the trauma and the alter carrying that trauma, and the manifestation of the pain is demonstrative of the alter being present, and then we have to check in and we have to make sure that alter is okay. And that's a very difficult thing to do, because often the pain becomes the focus and we have to sort of sidestep the pain and try and think, what is the medium by which that pain is there in the first place? Why is it coming forward? So we become the detective all over again. So having the pain can often focus the person and they get stuck holding that pain. It doesn't get resolved. We have to sidestep the pain and try and understand what is the reason for it being present in that moment, in that time, and in that place, and possibly within the different aspects of the body that it's originating in. And it can be fundamentally healing for people when the nature of that trauma is understood. The pain then can start reducing and the person doesn't experience that in the same way, because it's been resolved, because it's been heard. And ultimately that's what we're trying to do with much of the trauma work that we do here. And alters are brilliant kind of conduits for bringing that traumatic experience to the fore in a way that is very, very difficult to ignore. And that's kind of the point. We shouldn't be ignoring it, but we have to really get resourced and helped, and therapy is the way in which we do this in the most effective medium we can. Again, I hope this has been helpful. It's very specific to that type of dissociation within DID and OSDD, and it is really kind of triggering in and helping us understand exactly what that traumatic experience is, that the body holds it, the alter holds it, and we bring all this to the front in a very gentle and compassionate way, and we try and achieve healing through resolution of that trauma. So I'm going to continue. I'm going to look at some other aspects of pain a bit later on. So there's another video to do. At least I hope this one has been helpful in giving a bit of insight into sort of more specific parts of pain. So please do all the usual stuff, sort of like, subscribe, share the video as much as you want to. That's really great. Leave the comments in the section. Always like reading those. Thank you very much for listening to this one. And in between now and the next one, please do take great care.